You're listening to Justice Warriors, where we share our worries and doubts about our Christian faith, and we ramble on about how somehow we might be part of bringing a little more justice, peace, and belonging. Hello and welcome to Justice Warriors episode 75. My name's Andy and as usual I'm joined by Leah. Say hi, Leah.
Hi there.
And Jörg. Say hi, Jörg.
Hello.
Hello. So today we thought we would talk about freedom. We are often told that being a Christian brings us freedom and that we're free now, or that maybe we're bound by something bad and freedom is on offer. But is that how we feel? Do we sometimes feel like church or Christianity is actually reducing our freedom? What do you think?
Is this where we give you our worries? Is that our cue?
Go on then, give me some worries.
So my worry is that it's a thing that doesn't really land much with people of a different generation, a younger generation to us. That they haven't been brought up so much with this whole thing about they're terrible people and they're always sinning and they should feel guilty. And I don't know if they have a sense of needing freedom. And certainly the freedom to go to church every Sunday morning and kind of keep a whole load of rules doesn't sound very appealing. So that's my concern. I also have some like wider questions about just freedom as an idea in general, and in a world which feels like it's tilting fast towards authoritarianism. What does God and church have to say about freedom in that context? In the context where you're not free in society. What are we doing to prepare people or make people think about what it might be like to live in a society where freedom is clearly curtailed, rather than in the subtle ways that it's curtailed now? Yeah, that's the start.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot in there. Interesting, I think two things for me that actually chime with a lot of what you're saying, because on the one hand, I mean, yeah, thinking about who this notion of freedom speaks to and how we experience freedom. So, I mean, it is odd to think that, you know, many of us, myself perhaps not included, grew up in a much freer world, and yet it feels constrained and increasingly constraining. So my kids, even though they grew up under a system that was much freer than the one I grew up under in East Germany, don't feel free. They feel constrained by climate change, by wars, by borders going up, by questions about whether they can ever land a job, much less a house. So in their sense, actually, the only sense of freedom is like an escapism, maybe into computer games, phones, fantasy. And actually, you know, even the fantasy can be quite dark and sort of concerning about power and different special abilities and who can defeat what. And I find that interesting. I mean, we've talked about this at some point before, how the whole sort of spirit of the world seems to have shifted between, let's say, the optimistic 90s and now, and not wanting to sort of glorify the 90s too much because they were also a very turbulent time. It does feel different now. But I think also the other point you raised, Leah, really sits with me as well. What do we mean by freedom? Like freedom from what? To what? Does freedom mean I'm no longer caring about what other people say, do, and think? Is that even possible? You know, how do we reconcile our interconnectedness with one another, with the environment around us, with the nutrients we consume, with this kind of notion of freedom that seems to celebrate in the sort of more popular version the complete ability to do whatever you want. And I don't think that's accurate. I don't think it's accurate anthropologically. I don't think it's accurate even biologically. Where it actually meets something we discussed last time about sort of causality and freedom to choose God or not. Like, to what extent we actually do have free will. So that whole notion still sits with me, and I don't think I understand how to conceptualize Christian freedom beyond the usual. You're free from the law. You're free to serve Christ, and all the sort of usual language around it. But what does it actually mean in philosophical terms and wider terms? Not sure.
Yeah, so the question of like, what do we mean by freedom? It feels to me like when people were enthusiastic about freedom in my younger years, Christian freedom, I guess that what they were talking about was freedom from, or like release from a feeling of guilt, like you were saying, Leah, of I'm a terrible person, but in some sense I don't have to feel bad about that anymore because it's wiped away, and that gave a real sense of freedom, which, by the way, is incredibly valuable, right? Like shame is such a powerful, like when people talk about being like slaves to sin, cycles of shame are so destructive and powerful in people's lives that if you are freed from that, that's a really important and good thing, right?
Yeah, as long as you're not freed in that sense, that means you can kind of just keep on doing what you were doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I do worry that in church, and there is this sort of sense of, well, Christ's forgiven me, I've confessed, I'm free from that. So therefore, I feel there has been some sense within the church of not then making people see through a proper punishment or a proper sort of sentence, and thinking about notable issues with leadership and sexual immorality and stuff, where people have been damaged, that people have been it's been part of the sweeping stuff under the carpet narrative that, well, they've confessed, and God's forgiven them, and they're free to to carry on, kind of thing, and they won't do it again. But then people haven't been moved from a position where they can harm others. And it's all been part of that story, which I think that cycle of guilt and confession and release plays into a bit. But that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, what you're describing. It just means that, unfortunately, like most things, it does get twisted.
Yeah, in some sense you could say that like the institutions there were kind of playing God and saying, God is capable of forgiveness, and so we're going to, take that position, take that place in the relationship ourselves, do the forgiving, and then, miss out the, punishment accountability part.
Yeah.
I also have absolutely seen really committed Christians absolutely trapped in cycles of shame, which I think I think Christianity has made life much worse, because there's the story that you can be free, and so when you come back to an addiction or something like that, then not only have you failed as a human, you've also kind of proven that you're not really saved or not acceptable to God or something, and so the shame is double and the cycle is harder to escape.
Failed you first and you second birth. Wow. But that, of course, comes with the idea that actually that freedom looks in a certain way. So what you said, Leah, I think is true, but there's also the flip side to that, is that the church actually produces part of the shame that it then sells the freedom from.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, in a way, to even become a Christian, you have to kind of buy the story that the way you are, you're condemned. You're terrible. You may feel like you're a good person, but you're not, because you have that that blame of inherited sin in you, and we've talked about this. And so once you've bought that, we can offer you the solution. And I'm not saying that's good Christian message. I'm not saying that's the only way to think about it, but this is how
But
it
that's
can
what
feel
I was
in
taught.
practice.
I was absolutely taught.
So that,
like the steps to teaching someone how they need to be a Christian, and like guiding them into being a Christian. Step one always is you need this freedom because you are currently enslaved.
Right. And I mean, when I gave my life to Jesus as a probably 8-year-old, I still remember parts of it vividly. You know, it was the typical standard kind of thing that came after quite a few years, I think, of teaching and learning this message. And it felt like, as a child, that moment when you were in trouble and now it was okay again, like scaled up. That's what it felt like. So in a sense, it was very much that production of like, no, you weren't good enough, but now God has accepted you, has adopted you. And again, I'm not trying to rubbish it either, because I think there's a tremendous release power and energy in that that's still visceral. And I think that, I mean, the fact that I can still dig into that feeling and the positivity of it is good in itself, right? But it's not as innocent as we make it out to be.
No, and I think there's perhaps another little aspect to it as well that I felt when I was growing up, which was that, or we've sort of touched on it, but that as a Christian you should be free from these repetitive behaviours. So, you know, I, as a child particularly, and still, if I'm honest, in moments into my adulthood, have you know, I can lose it. I can really lose my temper, and obviously that's much more common when you're younger. And so I would feel so terribly guilty when I had, and well, what had I done wrong? How had I not been following Jesus that, you know, that I gave way to this kind of behavior? And I think in the end it wasn't really freeing, because actually probably all that changed in that is that I've grown up and learnt to, you know, deal with things a bit better. But maybe more helpful to the young Leah would have been conversations about how anger works, and, you know, all that business about it being normally a result of lots of things that have been festering over time. And, you know, there could have been, you know, I know about that kind of material because you hear about it when raising kids, but those conversations probably would have been more helpful to me than this constant feeling that, well, why was I not being set free from this, and why did I keep returning to this behavior? And so that was not useful. I don't know quite where I'm going, other than a bit of
are you not properly saved?
was I not? Why was I not? So what was this freedom business? Because it didn't feel like it.
It also is interesting because it prevents you from becoming fully you. Because I mean, the flip side of the anger issues is actually your resilience, your will, your strength, right? So that bit then gets broken rather than developed, as not broken, but gets sort of hampered or fenced in rather than developed as a resource, because there's a risk that we all need to kind of look the same, which wasn't the original idea of Christian freedom, I should think. I think part of what made it appealing is that Christianity came about in a society that was very regimented, both on the Jewish side through law and piety, but also on the Roman side, where you expected to do the hierarchies where you belonged, you know, who was a free man, who was a slave, women, children, and all the things you could and could not do. So here's a community that says, no, none of this matters. It's you. It's you who is seen by God as you are. And I think that's a beautiful thing. But like you were saying earlier, Leah, when we are in a society where that's the core message, then Christianity actually risks becoming the one saying, no, you're still rubbish. You've got to be rubbish, because otherwise our solution doesn't fix anything.
How are we going to fix you? Yeah. And actually, I was going to just a tiny digression, just absolutely what you're saying, but also I think now I look back on it, knowing what I do about feminism and the patriarchy, and there was a lot of what I felt as a youngster, which was me not fitting the mold of how a young girl or a woman ought to behave. So that kind of brings it into sort of, we were talking a bit earlier about kind of unity and diversity and freedom. Where was the freedom to be the person that, you put it really well, Yorgos, just waffling on maybe, but where was the freedom for me to be the child that I was, as opposed to the child that society expected me to be, because I was female, and I didn't obviously realize any of that at the time. I only can see that in retrospect.
Yeah, but that's just a digression. Yeah, you're right.
I think that applies to some of these other cycles that I've talked about. Like, so even cycles that are really harmful, there's still a question there about what's going on with you, right? And if the answer to that is just, well, you're a sinner and you've been freed from this, so you should be free from it by now, it doesn't actually answer why this stuff is happening. And sometimes there is stuff there that can bring freedom if you find out.
Those that die by wearing the badge, they're the chosen whites. Those who died are justified for wearing the badge, they're the chosen whites. The justified. Those that died, they're the chosen whites.
Can we connect this to the question of what we actually mean by freedom? Because also what you were saying, Leah, and you, Andy, about like who we are as a being. Because I don't, like, who am I as a free being? I'm so determined by everything that I've experienced in my life, and by what I'm connected with, and by the, from the conversations I've had to, again, what I've eaten, to where we live, to what the resources are, to the people we know, to, the way we can put ourselves in relation to others. So what then even is freedom when actually, we can complexify our subjectivity to no end in a sort of asymptotic, you'll never reach a full description of who we are. Maybe that's freedom, but it's not freedom in the sense of it's not determined. Like, you're not free to be everything you want to be. You're actually free to be the one that you are. And then maybe there are certain norms and things like that, and those are important to deconstruct, like you were saying, Leah, that will try and mold you into something else that you're not, by over-determining you by your gender, or by your accent, or by your color of your skin, or by how much money you have. But actually, isn't freedom not this abstract human soul that rests in us? Like, that's what Christianity often makes it to be, right? It's like this abstract entity that has nothing to do with your body, nothing, and we're all equal in that sense, in a very, very abstract way. When I think the beauty of freedom is actually that we're all so different in our determination, right? That I don't quite know what I'm going to get back from you, because we're not the same. And that, I think, creates the illusion of freedom. Whereas, sorry, I'm going very deep in some sense here, but like, that's the thing that bothers me. But when we talk about freedom, we have this idea that it somehow means we're disconnected, when we're never disconnected.
Yeah, and like, when you talk about the abstract soul being disconnected from the body, I think that includes being disconnected from the personality. Like, I think I grew up with this idea that there was this kind of perfect me who was identical to all the other perfect me's and everyone else, because it was a kind of a nothing in a way. And then all of this pesky personality stuff was part of the kind of flaws. And that feels now to me like the opposite of freedom, right? Freedom would mean people all being quite different from each other, presumably.
But yeah, without losing that sense of connectedness, isn't it? It's not that freedom to go out and find yourself in isolation and be the best version of yourself, or whatever the current, you do you kind of thing. In splendid isolation, it's about free to join. I mean, maybe this comes back a little bit to what we were talking about in the last episode, because there's an interest. I mean, that really set me thinking about that parable, about how we were saying that the person who didn't want to wear the white robe, that there was a sense of having to take on a group identity, wasn't there? So it was like, the initial thing was all these people got brought in or got invited in because of their identity as the kind of people that you would invite to a wedding. That was their identity. And then it was thrown open, because they didn't come. It was thrown open to this disparate group of people who all were totally unqualified, but all unqualified in lots of different ways. And then there was this sense that they were brought together, but then they still were given some badge of identity. So, yeah, I don't know quite know where I'm going with that, but I just thought it was interesting in that there was a separateness. So having a separate identity initially, but then having some sort of shared identity and being willing to take on an identity as part of the group. But how can we talk about that without losing your own personality, I suppose?
Yeah. And I don't think you can talk about it without being constrained, right? Being part of a community, which surely is, I can't imagine like freedom as a positive for me if that meant not being connected and part of a community. And so it must be part of some ideal picture of humanity, and it's incredibly constraining to be in relationship with other people. That's kind of the point of it, that you're shaped by each other and you shape each other.
Well, it's not just constraining, doesn't it also increase your own reach, your own articulation, your own ability? So, I mean, the image I find very helpful of agency, and it doesn't sound like it at first, is that of a marionette. And this comes from the French sociologist Bruno Latour. He uses this image to kind of help us think through agency differently. And he basically makes the point that the more plugins a doll has, the more articulate it is, the more strings it has, the more nuanced its articulations can be. And by the way, it's not simply that the puppeteer pulls the strings and the doll just kind of transports the power, because it translates it all in a way. So a good puppeteer knows exactly how the puppet will act and react. And so, the causality of what makes the movement work and makes you laugh and makes it real life, is actually the working together of the two of them. So we tend to think of freedom as being totally free from your influence on me, but actually by engaging with one another, we're enabling each other to be doing more than we could do apart. And so the more strapped in I am, the more free I am. The more connections I have, the more I can be heard, and I can experience, and I can translate forces in more and more complex ways. And so I'm increasing degrees of freedom. And if you want to kill a puppeteer's doll, you cut all the strings. And yet, perversely, that's our idea of freedom. Let go of the puppet strings and I'm free.
Right.
No, you'll be dead on the ground, right? So in a way, I wonder if the invitation into the early Christian community was not one to put on this white shirt and then you look like everybody else, but to say, we are going into a celebration of life. We've seen the one who's just broken through death. We're encountering a much, much bigger sense of the universe here, and that's the invitation we're inviting you in. There's a multiplication of connection to one another, through one another, that would enable you to be free. Maybe I'm taking the Bible in way too far direction, too far away from what it's trying to say here, but whereas a prescriptive idea of the law restricts, it's now, how do you serve one another? How do you become the body of Christ? How do you connect with the divine in such a way that it operates through you and then everything becomes possible? I mean, that's the aspiration, right? So it's a kind of a universalism of that this freedom aspires to.
In a very authoritarian society, those people were then being allowed to like break the cultural norms, treat each other as equals when there would have been hierarchy, and act as if the hierarchy outside there didn't matter, not have to like be in hock to one particular temple or whatever.
Yeah.
And I imagine...
And to the point of death, by the way.
Yeah. So often claiming your freedom gets you in trouble, yeah. And I guess that would have been quite scary. And actually, earlier in our conversation when we were talking about becoming yourself, or being yourself maybe, it got me thinking about my journey of kind of doubt or deconstruction or whatever you call it, and thinking of that as a journey into freedom. I would say that has brought quite a lot of freedom for me from a lot of constraints that were perhaps self-imposed, but it's really scary, that type of freedom, where you don't know where you fit, and you don't know what the outcomes are, and you don't know whether you're just making a massive mistake, right? And it must have been similar in that authoritarian society. To resist it must have been terrifying.
Well, it was, and it's a mess too when the law no longer applies, right? So when it's not very clear what's expected, and all of a sudden, when you write to a church, there's no longer slave, no free, no male nor female, and then women preachers arise in a patriarchal society, and there's some people who will really hate that, and then you get to have a conversation about this because you're actually realizing that, one another's freedom is connected to each other.
And I think the point about deconstruction is relevant because then once you have kind of been through a process like that, you then want to find some community on the other side, and it's very easy to then just find a community of other people who are also doing some of the same stuff, but then that feels quite isolationist in and of itself. So maybe that's a whole different topic, but anyway.
Also, potentially that community is full of people who are trying not to put any constraints on you, which almost means it's not a community.
Yeah, because you have to show up in community, right? You can't just say, oh, well, we used to do that thing where we went to church every Sunday morning, but now, we don't do that anymore. So what do we do?
You can't just do a podcast where you moan about how things were bad in the past.
Well, I was just going to say, actually, you don't lose the past, right? Like how free are you when you keep coming back to it? I mean, look at sort of like British humanists, how much they define their understanding of their freedom through religion. Or the old joke, an atheist, somebody who constantly thinks about God, want to be free from. So, if this sort of plug-in metaphor of freedom has any purchase, then actually it would mean to maximize connections. That a deconstruction journey isn't just to leave the old, but to keep it and add on to it. Is to move around, is to find freedom within it in some weird sense, because you bring other people with you on a journey, or you kind of make these connections between where you stand now and where you once were.
Well, I think it feels to me like there's so many people I know of our generation specifically who just seem very lost in church, not finding it connecting, not finding their place in it. And yeah, I don't know what a community on the other side looks like for that, because it does feel it's needed. But
But is what Jörg's saying, is Jörg's message to me, as someone who like almost would walk away because it feels like it doesn't fit anymore, that somehow we need to find freedom within it, not always, and not if it's hurting you. And like, listener, please don't take any rules from this, but is the message to me, like, you seem to still be here, You need to somehow try and find a freedom, which means interaction with people and relationships with people, even people who don't agree with you, because you've left behind the idea that everyone has to agree with each other, right?
And I mean, that's the thing, right? So what is the notion of freedom that we're pursuing here? Is that I'm free from your thoughts, your opinions that offend me because they're different from mine by cutting you off. Is there not another kind of freedom that can say, well, here's where the difference is, but it's actually interesting to talk to you about this? And I know that's often not the experience of church. And we talked about this last time, how in my theodicy understanding, and when people say we're going to pray for this problem of something or rather of a more middle-class nature, I feel like I can't say no to that because immediately it cuts like a sort of oh, what, you think you're better than whatever, so it kind of creates a distance rather than saying, oh, interesting, that's how you feel about that. I'm in a completely different place. So what does it actually mean to gain that kind of freedom where we can enjoy difference, where we can enjoy actually meeting one another rather than saying, well, let's all do the same thing in church and, congregate around this one song or this one saying and then like find our freedom somehow in the fact that we're all the same. I mean, that is the opposite of freedom. And it leads to masking and actually people not arriving because we don't want to hear your story. We want to hear your story in template X.
Yeah.
And now you do what they tell you. And now you do what they told you. And now
Isn't church just all masking?
Not for some it isn't, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't...
What, for you? You feel it is?
I don't know. I don't know. It feels like it, yeah. I don't know. Why am I struggling with that? Is it because it's just hard to admit, or is it because there's more to it than that? I mean, I think it's always been weird that church contains a lot of people that you're friends with, and yet somehow for me, actual church doesn't feel like I'm among friends. It feels like somewhere where I have to just not make a mistake kind of thing. I had a very interesting, it wasn't interesting at the time, it was very painful. I had a very painful experience recently where I spoke to someone who in the past I've been very close with and still have a very positive sense of relationship with, but got talking about sort of immigration type issues and stuff like that. And we already knew to some extent, but realized that we were coming from very different places on that. And he was saying essentially something along the lines of people like you need to stop calling everyone a racist just because they disagree with them, right? And I was like, yes, but what you're saying is racist. And like it was very difficult conversation, and it just got me. It came to mind when you were talking, Jörg, about like how does one approach a conversation like that with freedom? I've felt a very strong lack of freedom because of my need to not get anything wrong, along with things that are probably quite healthy, like not wanting to break the relationship and things like that. I think there was a lot of freedom there from the point of view of I can't like have a chink in my armor. I can't say something wrong and have to correct myself. Just like a lot of stuff that probably was unhelpful instincts, real strong constraints on me. Actually, what I would like to do approaching conversation like that is just share some of myself, right? Not some arguments off the shelf. And in retrospect, I think I did some arguments off the shelf, and I felt really angry and upset. And yeah, so what would it look like for freedom to be in that kind of difficult conversation or in that place of difference?
I mean, two things come to mind, Andy. I mean, one question for you actually about the masking point is when you do the intercessions in church.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a terrifying thing to do, and it's exactly those kinds of things like what can I say, what can I not say. But there's a real authentic you in there that people appreciate, and it is because you make it available, and because it is challenging, and because you think about what you can and cannot say, and because you also think of what must be said in regards to where the world is, like actually forging these connections, that it seems free and freeing in a way, right? So I guess I'm saying this is like the sort of the terror of doing something wrong is not opposite to freedom.
Right, absolutely, yeah.
If it doesn't hinder you to do what's in your heart and to bring your gift to the table. And in some ways, I wonder if that's also the question about people I would viscerally disagree with. Is it mine to solve? What do I have to give in this instance? You know, can I take a step back and say, wow, it's amazing how many different frogs there are in this pond? And they all do different things. And, you know, it helps the species survive because we are interconnected. And so, in a sense, even while we're discussing these things, while we disagree, this is an important thing to have, because what we see when these conversations no longer take place, you're in a version of what happens in some of America, where you cannot have these conversations anymore, and anger and division grows. Whereas unity grows, where there's freedom is still there to explore differences. So it's not that this kind of freedom that I'm proposing here has anything to, is completely free from, disconnected from a sense of responsibility for another, a sense of constraint, because we are connected. But it's free because then through the other you can experience a much larger world than you can when you're separate from all these connections. You're just on your phone in your own echo chamber, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, loads of responses. Yeah, so like when I do prayers in church, sometimes it does come with a sense of release, that which is a sense that I have brought some of my authentic self. And I think that is the kind of freedom we're talking about. Is obviously a curated.
And by the way, that self has only a place there, right? Like when you say your authentic self.
Yeah, yeah.
The experience of that authentic self only happens on that pulpit. So like the notion of authenticity, right, is never disconnected. It has a spot.
Absolutely. But it's also a curated version of myself.
Yes.
But maybe, yeah. I mean, maybe I'm learning that is part of what happens when you bring yourself, right? That maybe I have some impossible goal of never curating myself that would mean that it was very unpleasant to be around me. But yeah, so yeah, maybe bringing some of yourself truthfully is the kind of freedom that we can look for as Christians and as deconstructed or whatever we are Christians, as much as other Christians.
Some of those that work forces.
So how does any of this make us, give us anything to offer a society that is perceiving itself to be less free, or actually is less free?
What do you mean it's less free? I mean, it's perceiving stuff to be
What I mean
freer
is,
than church.
like the point that Leah raised at the beginning, like if our society is becoming less free either because of social media or because of the power of billionaires or because of authoritarian politics, do we have anything to bring? I mean, is it about being a pocket where your number of followers on social media doesn't matter, or I don't know?
And I think if we can crack this thing of how to disagree well, and it should be something that we think about collectively as church, wouldn't that be amazing? How do we do that? But it's something that society needs so badly, and at least in church you have a chance of having some. I mean, I was chatting with some friends recently about why I still go to church, and a lot of it for me is that there isn't anywhere else where I meet the same kind of cross section of people. Perhaps a little bit at work, but that's different because I'm the boss, and that's a different kind of relationship. So, chatting a while ago to a friend of my son's who was doing politics at uni, and they said that they found they couldn't. So the discussion classes in uni were really, really quiet, and people didn't feel that they could fully express their own point of view in case they got cancelled or shamed or something, And so I was like, man, if you've got a bunch of politics students, I mean, my experience of university was people talked endlessly to like ridiculous levels about, I mean, all sorts of nonsense, serious and not serious. And if even a bunch of politics students at a good university are sitting around unable to say things clearly, then we do have a problem about being able to disagree well. Wouldn't it be amazing if the church, if that was a gift the church could offer out into society? But I fear that we're probably just as stuck with it as anyone else.
And there's actually a lot of auxiliary messages in the Christian gospel that help, not to think too highly of yourself, to keep in mind that, you could store all these things in your barn, but tonight your soul might be demanded from you, to be, the first will be last, all these kind of inversions that we have, these reminders that I often forget in my day-to-day life, because my job is built on quick judgment and being able to know, and then kind of a sense of who fits where, and even how you might walk through the city, and you just kind of, you kind of gauge out people. So here there's so many helpful reminders in our faith to say, no, like, you're not any better than others. So like, in that sense, that Christian equality sense is actually helpful, as long as we don't think of it as this kind of disembodied abstract soul before God, but in all your different embodiednesses, you're each as important to the whole to function. Again, the body analogy that Paul makes in Corinthians is really important here. But I worry that we talk too much about freedom in this very abstract sense, freedom from the law, freedom from shame, and not so much this freedom to look onto my sister, my brother, my neighbor in church as though they're just every bit as essential to the whole as I am. That they were put into my life and I into theirs so that we could encounter in greater fullness that amazing creation in which we live, and that one day we might even have a glimpse of that life that's still coming toward us. Like, that is the core of the Christian message of freedom, and yet we've abstractified it so much that we don't put that front and center. And I agree with you, Leah, if that was the experience of church, of true encounters, of listening to one another, that would be a very different thing. And, sometimes it does happen that way, and that is a very, very appealing thing.
I was struck by you saying, like, I think it applies much wider than church, right? But you saying they've been put into my life and I've been put into their life. Because I think sometimes it's the second part that we can miss as well, right? Like, I am a legitimate member of this community, and my authentic self is what I have to offer to that community, and not some conformism or someone who like keeps their anger for tomorrow to make sure that they appear like a good Christian this morning.
For the ride home, that was my experience growing up. That sort of parental fights would happen in the car after church. That was always it.
I wonder whether that's, because there's been a bit of suppression of your true self.
Spending a lot of time together and behaving. Yeah.
So I also had a thought, which this is like a terrible slogan, but for a divided society, finally the church has something to offer, because we've been divided for centuries. So we got some insight.
We know. Do we know how it works though? Because I mean, when I look at what happens in ecumenical councils and the kind of paperwork, and I mean, there's also a kind of Christianity that's developing in sort of more modern forms of Pentecostalism that just flows all over the place without any sense of direction. That's perhaps more, but yeah, I don't see unity coming anytime soon to that.
No, I mean, we do in the Church of England. We do live with each other, let's say, or near each other. We try not to talk about things we disagree on.
That's true.
Yeah, that's the issue, isn't it? I fear that it's a just keeping quiet about stuff that keeps us all flowing along together, and then suddenly when an issue does have to be hammered out, like that business in PCC and last year, then suddenly all these things kind of flail out into the open, and oh my goodness, and we're just busy trying to stuff a lid back down on it again, so that, you know, people who mention it in their sermons shouldn't have done that, you know. Maybe I'm talking out of turn or too vaguely, but anyway, you know what I'm talking about. But you know what I mean? That felt a classic case of it came front and centre. It was forced into view. Quick! Let's tidy that one back down.
And the reactions, not just in our church, but on the issue more widely, are one of fear. Like the other side is coming for me, and that tells you a lot about the relationship, right? So it's actually very hard to build relationships across differences and conflict like this, because we're not prepared for it. We don't have those kind of connections. I don't know the 3D side of you. I know the slogan-esque side of you, and therefore I have absolutely no idea what's coming my way. You're very puzzling, and if we were more connected, I would understand. You know, we would move more in concert, and we could actually benefit from one another's differences more. And I mean, that's the thing that struck me about the church in the Anglican Church as a whole on this, or the Church of England, I should say, on the living in love and faith, is that actually, when you carefully listen to both sides, the argument is about how can I prevent that the other side makes my faith impossible. That's the kind of self-presentation everybody gives. They are coming to attack me, and I'm just shoring up to make sure that they're not going to make impossible what I believe. And that's a sign of actually not knowing one another.
So just to give a little bit of context to any listener who got slightly lost, the Living in Love and Faith is like a Church of England initiative that happened a while ago to do with sexuality and stuff like that. And then there was some disagreement in our church about that, and some fallout from that. And that really resonates with me, Jörg, because I was feeling very much like I was in the minority. Like I was on a side of this debate and I was in the minority. And I spoke to someone, and it became very clear to me that they felt they were in like someone on the other side. They were in a really harassed, endangered minority. And it partly depends. Yeah, it partly depends how wide you're looking, right? So perhaps I was in the majority in a very big context, but in a smaller context not, and the other way around for them. But yeah, that feeling of not just we disagree, but I am under threat, and I really feel that about so many. Again, it's my upbringing again. But if there's a theological disagreement, I feel like no, I am going to be snuffed out,
Ostracized.
And that's what you would hope we might be free from.
Yeah.
That sense of existential threat because I'm disagreed with. You would I don't know. Is it possible to go beyond that? I don't know, because that's so much of, think about the rise of the far right, and obviously there's an enormous amount of fear mongering and whipping up of feeling, but there has to be a kernel and a core there for people for it to be whipped up, so you can't tell somebody who feels entirely safe and prosperous and unthreatened that these people are all coming for them, because they'll just go, well, I'm all right, thanks very much, don't worry about it. There's something there, isn't there, that so much of this thing that seems so unfathomable if you're on the other side is actually rooted in self-preservation and threat.
And conversely, once you know a refugee from country X, or we've been to the refugee camp in Dunkirk some years ago, and, not that that was enough to build a relationship, but there are people that somehow then dwell in your heart, and and all of a sudden your whole perspective on this changes and say, well, there's got to be room for you. So it's in the abstract that this is a problem, but when it gets concrete and somebody you're in relationship with, it becomes actually much, much harder to just kind of say no. And you then think about, well, how can we share? What can we do together?
So it feels to me like we're talking about freedom as relationship and bringing your unique self. But also I feel like the bit we've just been talking about is like we're kind of reminding ourselves or learning that other people will feel threat. Disagreement brings threat for not just other people, for ourselves. And so if we are going to be free as a community and in relationship, it's going to come because we have learnt how to make space. So it's not threatening to bring your true self when you disagree, even profoundly. But
because your true self is already embedded in that community. Like, your true self is, the one who sometimes says things slightly differently from the others. And we know that about you.
So as soon as I finished speaking, I was like, oh, this is a community of people who are so careful about what they say so as not to bring about a threatening environment that they're all walking on eggshells and not at all free. But I think you're right. Where does freedom, that kind of freedom, come from? It comes from being known and having experienced that last time you messed up, you weren't kicked out.
Right.
And also that you're able to make, like you do when you do your intercessions, you're able to make yourself vulnerable. And that's a hard thing to do, isn't it? And I would hope that as my faith has continued, I have become a bit less guarded and a bit more able to make myself vulnerable to other people and trust that God still loves me, and even if they don't accept me exactly for who I am, there is that underpinning and those everlasting arms beneath, because I am made in God's image to be who I am, and I'd like to be that person fully in relationship with you.
Yeah.
And I can only begin to do that if I make myself vulnerable and hope that by making the first move, you're not going to close that down. But if you are, then there is something that Christ gives me, which makes that less damaging. Still, it hurts, of course, but it makes it less existential, less destructive of everything that I am. And maybe that's what some of that kind of freedom in Christ language is trying to put across, that we might be one as God and Jesus are one, because we are one within that relationship. We are fully accepted and known and loved within that Trinity relationship. Therefore, does that give us more ability to then go out and make those overtures and those moves that might enable us to be one with the people around us.
Yeah. And how do we make it a good experience when other people bring their authentic selves, so that we are part of building that confidence and freedom in them?
And like everything, it's so much easier to demand that other people do it for us than to do it for other people.
And it is probably partly about like not calling them a racist, right?
Probably, yeah.
All right. Well, maybe that's a good place to come to an end there.
Not call other people racists. That's a good.
The final answer is don't call people racist, even if they are.
At least we've reached a stage in progress in history where we can all agree that being a racist is a bad thing. Well, it's a little bit like climate change, isn't it? Most people agree that climate change is a bad thing. What we're just a little bit more disagreeing about is how we're actually going to fix it and what actually makes it better and what makes it worse. So it's a bit the same with racism. We all seem to at least now agree that being a racist is bad.
Yeah, well, I think that's rolling back too, but yeah.
Oh, really? Okay, well, yeah.
But hopefully not as much as it's made out to be. So did we have a reading? I thought, Jörg, you might want to read the thing you read to us before we recorded.
I can. I mean, because we actually started talking about unity originally, and then in our conversation around freedom, we ended in a place of unity in very much what Leah was saying, that actually that unity comes from recognizing that we're all in that same Jesus, so that when somebody hurts me, it's not as threatening as I might have thought. So this is quite well known as Jesus' priestly prayer for the disciples. Jesus praying for unity is also what it's often called. Or Jesus praying for all believers is in John 17, from verse 20. My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe me through their message, that all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I in them and you in me. May they be brought to complete unity, to let the world know that you sent me and have loved them, even as you've loved me.
Well, a prayer for us to know that we're loved and to be rooted in that would probably take us a long way towards a lot of the things we've been talking about.
I'm thinking about interconnectedness as unity, not conformity. I think this kind of complete unity, when I initially read it, made me uneasy, but walking through this idea of freedom as connectivity, that's a different kind of unity, because that means you're still in a unique place where you are, and that place has a purpose, and it's articulate, it has multiple connections, it's held, and it transports, it translates.
Yep. All right. Well, that's our prayer for all of us. Listener, thanks for putting up with us again. Thanks, Leah. Thanks, Jörg. See you next time.
You've been listening to Justice Warriors. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also follow us on social media by searching for Justice Warriors, where warrior is spelt like someone who worries about things. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating, since that helps other people find us. Also, please tell your friends about us in real life. We'd love to hear from you. To get in touch, use the email address in the show notes or contact us via the social media links. Thanks for listening.
Told ya.